Welcome everybody. And that music was by one of our panelists, Sarita Collette, who you're going to meet in just a few minutes here. It's really, really beautiful. Good afternoon. Welcome to this table talk for the South Asian community. Homecoming, navigating South Asian ancestral grief and reclaiming spirituality. My name is Zubin Desai. I lead product and design at Reimagine. I'm honored to welcome you all to the table. When my team and I created Table Talk last fall as part of Reimagine's Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative, also what we like to call JEDI, we sought to create an honest, lively, and unscripted conversation where Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, LGBTQ+, differently abled, and all other marginalized, underrepresented communities could share their own unique perspectives and truth via a wide array of subjects related to how we live and die in our respective communities. Although created for and by individuals in these communities, everyone is welcome at the table. So we welcome all allies here today. Thank you for joining us. And then last but not least, I just want to thank the John and Juana Harmon Foundation for their unyielding support of Reimagine and our JEDI initiative, which makes Table Talk possible. They've really been supportive of us as we explored ways that we can be more effective and inclusive in DEI initiatives. So before I introduce you to my co-host, I'd like to engage you in answering a single question, which we'll do a little poll at the beginning, at the end, so we can track where people are at. Andy's going to launch a quick poll. It's one question. Do you think this Table Talk series is helping to advance healing in your community and or other groups impacted by inequities and injustices? We'll have some more questions at the end of this experience, and this is really, really helpful for us as we plan more table talks and JEDI initiatives. And I'll show you, we have like, I think 6 more table talks coming up in the next month or two. So we want to keep these going. All right, so I want to introduce my co-host. Next slide, please. Roshni Kavate, who's the founder and creative director of Cardamom and Kavate, a wellness platform dedicated to reclaiming nourishing practices rooted in ancestral wisdom for a collective liberation. She believes grief is a portal to wholeness, and she's been an incredible Reimagine collaborator. She's actually hosted just in the past year 18 different events on the Reimagine platform, and she's been doing a lot of work around ancestral grief, and I'm really, really excited that she's helping me with this event. So why don't you come on in, Roshni, and we'll get going.
Thanks, Zubin. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. And before I share the intention for our talk today, I just want to call in my ancestors, and maybe this is a moment for you to also call in your ancestors. So whoever they are, by choice or by family connections, just calling in our ancestors, and maybe just even feeling your heart in this moment. There's a lot to grieve today and in this moment. So, our intention for our table talk today, our goal is to hold space for those who identify as South Asian as we navigate ancestral grief and reclaim our spirituality. Ancestral grief is our past, our present, and our future. My own spiritual path and my grief journey have been deeply intertwined. There has been so much to grieve, of being displaced, of losing language, of forgetting the taste of my mangoes from my homeland, the weaving looms that stopped, of not being seen, of living under the oppression of colonization, of living under caste-based oppression, of living in a society that promotes violence, of not being allowed to dance, to sing, to feel safe in my body, of lands being broken into pieces. Yet trauma is not the only ancestral way of being. My spiritual journey has been one of reclaiming, nourishing, and integrating the wisdom of my ancestors. I am bathing myself in herb-steeped oils. I'm draping myself in indigo-dyed cotton. I'm cooking with turmeric, cardamom, and ghee. I'm chanting, I'm dancing, I'm centering my pleasure. I'm standing in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, Dalit communities, trans folks. And I'm standing up against supremacist systems and creating boundaries against systems and people that deny my existence. This moment is also a reminder that our struggle and our grief is intersectional, especially this week as we're seeing the COVID crisis in India. We're grieving many lives. We're grieving the Sikh people being shot in Indiana. We're grieving Black and Indigenous communities being oppressed by white supremacy. And there is so much to hold space for. And there's also hope, and there's also our stories that will come alive. Just like there's no one right way to live life or grieve, there is no one right way to be South Asian. So let's recognize that the experience within the South Asian community can greatly vary depending on region, language, immigration status, and so forth. Let's use our short time together to listen to one another's perspective so we can help guide ourselves, our families, and our larger communities in wholeness and healing. I would like to introduce our guests today, and rather than read their bios, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. And we always ask our guests to talk about the table that they're sitting at so we get to know them a little better. So if our panelists can take a minute or so to tell us what tables are you sitting at, personally, professionally. Um, we'll start with Sarita Collette. If you can lead us through a short embodiment practice and get us started.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Rashni. That was really beautiful introduction. And I'm really grateful to be here with all of you. So my name is Rita Collette. My table is a space for queer and trans liberation, Black, Brown, Indigenous, and POC rest and liberation. My table is currently positioned on Anishinaabe Dakota territory, which is also known as Minneapolis, where the start and heart of the Black Liberation Uprising began last summer. Something that we are still in the midst of after the killing of Dante Wright. So, I wanted to share a little embodiment practice because often when we get into conversations about grief, death, and mourning, particularly in the West, we don't have a lot of resource to resource ourselves when dealing with the heaviness of death. And so embodiment practices, there's so many different kinds, and I'm gonna just go over one briefly from my tradition, which is called Abhyanga. Abhyanga is traditionally used with oil in Ayurveda practice of self-massage and can be done with like a sesame oil. And you start from your extremities and you go towards your heart. But we're just gonna do a brief variation of that. So what you'll want is to feel a sense of your seat in a comfortable place. So the right and left sitting bones feel relatively stable and supported. Your back feels supported so that you can relax your shoulders. And if it feels safe for you, close your eyes. If you'd like to just avert your eyes from the screen, I recommend that. Um, Embodiment really is to embody, and when we have screens it's difficult to get there. So if it feels comfortable, close your eyes, and I want you to just take a moment as you breathe in and out to notice how you're doing today. Just notice how you're feeling as you've arrived in this space. What has been most present on your mind? The future, the present, the past. And if that feeling has a felt experience, is there any tingling sensation on the skin? Is there any heaviness or dullness in the shoulders and the neck? Is there any tightness around the chest? Is the belly soft and free, or is it constricted? And you just take a moment to recognize the shape of self in space without judgment. And I want you to just begin a diaphragmatic breath practice. So sometimes taking the hands to the abdomen is a great way to support how you're breathing. And diaphragmatic breath is really also known as belly breathing, slowing down your breath, consciously slowing down the way you breathe. And so this first inhale, I want you to just begin to trace the feeling of your diaphragm below your rib cage, press down, allowing your belly to expand. And now I want you to feel on the exhale how the diaphragm will naturally lift, allowing your belly to soften back toward the midline of your body. And now that you are aware of that feeling and that movement, I want you to consciously slow down the rate of your in-breath and consciously slow down the rate of your out-breath. And just continue to breathe in that way, starting to summon or draw your mind toward this part of yourself. It's like the minute we start to recognize we're breathing, we get a chance to be inward, not so outward. And then you can take your hands and just rub them together to create some warmth. And for the self-massage, just start on your forehead. You can close the eyes or keep them soft, and then begin to massage across your brow ridge, all the way out to the temples. And as we do self-massage, I often tell people, what pressure do you need? How much pressure? What's the pace you're taking? Are you trying to hurry or rush this moment? Can you slow things down? And then take the fingers to the earlobes and just begin at the top of your earlobes and go all the way down, tugging at the bottom, starting to open the senses here. And really getting at the bridge of your nose underneath to the cheekbones, really underneath the eyes. So the mucosal lining this time of spring, this time of COVID, this time of allergies, might feel some heaviness in the morning, just massaging that out gently. And the jawline where sometimes we clench or tighten here, we're feeling overwhelmed. So just a loving reminder to continue to breathe smoothly. Maybe now is a time for exhales out the mouth. You can exhale like you're blowing out a candle, sometimes help to relieve some of the pressure that we're dissolving when we do self-massage. And then I like to take my hands and just gently massage from the cervical spine. So starting from the vertebrae and working my way around. And here's when I recognize like, oh, okay, my neck is like really sore because I'm holding all this energy between my head and my heart, and just offering loving kindness there. And then crossing the hands to opposite shoulder and making your way down each arm without any hurriedness, as if you're giving yourself these hugs of love and affirmation, of remembrance. And then let the hands say hello to one another. Fingers and hands that we use for screens and all these other things, doing so much for us. And then when you're ready, just take one hand over the other, over your sternum. This is considered in my tradition and many traditions the heart center. So a place of unconditional love, but also truth. And as you breathe into that, I just want you to remember who you are beyond all the things that life has thrown you in the last year, all the hardships and challenges. There's a sense of like, I am this person, however that feels or connects with you in this moment. Just breathing into that for a couple of breaths. And just remembering the part of you, this aliveness that exists throughout all of life. And then when you're ready, you can release your hands and slowly come back.
Thank you for that delicious practice. I want to invite our next guest, Joan Rubran. What table do you sit at, Joan?
Peace, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for that practice. I'm really basking and enjoying the piece of that. So I'm really appreciating you for that. I'm sitting here in Takaranto, colonially Toronto, indigenous to the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat's people, the Chippewa, and the Senecas. I sit at many other tables as well, tables inclusive of trans, queer, indigenous, Black and brown folks of color, of the Indo-Caribbean, Indo-Guyanese, Guyanese, South Asian diaspora. I also sit with a lot of non-binary, queer, trans, femmes, transnational femmes of the diaspora. I sit with indentured ancestors, ancestors of indentured laborers, indentured servants displaced from India, brought to the Caribbean, including my ancestor Sahaji Gulabdas and my Aji Mohani Lakshmi Tulsi. I also sit with the tantric goddesses as a child of Kali Ma, here to transgress with their rage the supremacies that is within this body. That's just a few tables that I sit on. I'm pleased to be here with all the folks.
Thank you for that beautiful description of all your tables. Our next guest is Aman Ali.
Yes, thank you for having me as well. I'm here based in New York City, and I live on the land of the Lenape tribe. And the table that I'm at, I think just being at a table is an adjustment for me. I'm a person as a filmmaker and a storyteller pre-pandemic was just always on the go, always traveling, always going all over the world, either performing or putting together films. And so just being still during this pandemic has been quite a change for me in my life. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be here, especially in a room where I can talk about my own experiences and not have to worry about talking on behalf of 1.2 billion people's other experiences. So that is definitely appreciative. But yeah, I grew up in Ohio, and I was literally one of the only like non-white people in town. And I very often found myself not only having to speak to my own experiences, but also speaking on other people's experiences as well. But I was also a person that was always just frustrated, not seeing people that looked like me in TV and in cinema. And it was something that I was always been intrigued by and wanted to get involved in telling my own story, but also using my platform to let other people tell their own stories as well. And so I had put together a film that is coming out on PBS next month. It's about I am a Muslim American, and this is a film about a Black American Muslim casket maker in New Jersey that takes two boys under his wing and teaches them how to be men. I believe we have a clip, a little trailer that we can show you all if you want to get a little sneak peek of it.
The second time I did a wash, it was a friend of mine. It was an honor and opportunity being able to help the ones that got called home and knowing my time is coming.
Through Uncle Hanif's experiences, his bad stuff, his rough time, I let him be an example to my kids because you could come out of that if you choose to.
No matter what I go through, I know that if I call Hanif, I know he always there for me.
When I'm alone, I talk to God. Sometimes.
For Quan, he's like a speck in a mountain full of snow. He sticks out like a sore thumb.
Just be careful on how you doing. Don't shoot it. He could be a good kid. He just need guidance. I want to make a strong, dynamic impact, not only on the world, but on me. Because if I deal with me, the world will see how I live.
So yeah, thank you for all the amazing and kind words. We're definitely grateful. But yeah, it's airing on PBS June 21st, and I think for us, we wanted to use the lens of death to normalize conversations about life. And one of the things, even from my own experiences, having lost my father during production of the film, so it's about 3 years ago, just realizing just how underprepared we are when it comes to talking about these subjects that, yes, there are amazing resources and obviously amazing organizations like this, but very often we don't know about these things until, you know, these moments happen in our lives. And so trying to normalize these conversations, making death a comfortable conversation to have and a beautiful conversation to have and a very rich, spiritually beautiful and culturally beautiful conversation in many of our upbringings, really trying to make that at the forefront and not make this awkward, scary, frightening subject that we all want to sweep under the rug. And learning how to lean into it is definitely something that we're not only looking to do with this film, but also looking to do with the campaign that we're embarking upon, is in working with communities all across the US to help embrace these conversations and lean into them.
Thank you, Aman. I was lucky enough to get an early sneak peek at the film, and it was such a deeply poetic, such a sensitive, deeply just moving movie. So I really encourage folks to catch this when it airs. I want to continue in that thread. Again, our experiences, from a Western lens is just so steeped in, suffering and trauma. I think your movie and your storytelling is, is highlighting sort of the vulnerability, the sensitivity, the sensuality of life and grief as well. I want to start our conversation there with all of you and ask, how are you making art? How are you, how do you bring in activism that's rooted in softness, vulnerability, beauty, and sensuality? Anyone can jump in.
Yeah, so great question, Roshni. For me, it's really centering pleasure, and pleasure has so many entry access points for me. It really started with just wanting to experience more beauty, more ease, more grace, more tenderness for me when I started to really embody pleasure. And I started embodying pleasure as a form of humanizing myself, as a form of self-preservation, because when I look in the social political world, I'm constantly seeing Indigenous Black and Brown bodies being degraded, our dignity, sovereignty, humanity being degraded. And so for me, pleasure became this form of self-preservation where I was going to say, I don't consent to internalizing that kind of trauma and that kind of harm. And I don't consent to believing that that is what is meant for me. So I really started with having a relationship with breath and actually slowing down and breathing more, being in nature, connecting with nature a lot more. Even just the way that I will drink water, I will slow that down and really feel the water moving through my body as it's nourishing me, holding me, really having a deep connection with myself in this kind of way. And that also kind of trickled into other art, for example, dancing, and really using dance as a modality for emotional processing and for coming back into my body and feeling the rhythm move me and feeling my body in movement with rhythm, with joy, with softness, with just an exquisite radiance. That's just some of the ways I use art, poetry, and pleasure to kind of come back into my body.
Yeah, I think for me, it's been about embracing all the messiness that can very often come with death. I think, understandably so, a lot of us have been so exposed to death, right? Whether we watch the news or in pop culture and just everything that's happening in the world, especially in these times, that you see people dying and you see even horrific video, that we all become to different degrees almost desensitized, where you hear numbers being thrown around about people dying and it doesn't register. But I think for me, in my own experience, it was one of those things where when my father had died, there was just so much to do. There was just like errands to run, and I had to prepare this, and my brothers and I had to do this and that. But just sitting down one day and someone telling me like, look, this doesn't make sense, and that's okay. You're going to be angry. You're going to feel sad. You're going to feel all these emotions, and just lean into it. And I really was grateful to get that advice. And it is something that is a lifelong journey when it comes to grieving. And that's okay. You may not understand every little part of it or why these happened or this happened, but that is a part of the process. That is a part of the journey. And it doesn't have to be angry, sad all the time. There are moments of joy and there's moments of gratitude. And I take it for everything that it is. And I think it's important. Like I said, death hits so many of us in so many different ways. And that's okay. It's okay to feel all of these things. And yeah, someone just mentioned in the chat, permission to grieve and feel. And that's the most important thing. Is very often we all have such busy lives that it's hard to give ourselves that space to even feel, let alone to sit with our feelings. And sometimes that can be frightening, and overwhelming. And that's okay. And that's why it's beautiful to have spaces like this and supportive spaces like this where we can sit and we can talk and we can feel, even if we don't have anything to say, just to be among people. I think that's super, super, super important. And so it's something that I not only have tried to practice with this film and with this art, but even just informally and socially, just with friends and even in spaces like this. And it's really trying to encourage people that, yes, it's okay to feel. It's okay to give yourself that space to feel.
Yeah, I'd be curious, Aman, because you are a practicing Muslim man. When you experienced that loss, did you feel like there was some guidance or playbook for dealing with death because of that faith?
That's a great question. It's funny because yes, there is. And I don't think it really registers until these moments happen. And so in Islam, when someone dies, there's a prayer, Inna Lillahi and Inna Ilaihi Raji'un. And that's how we start our film and how it ends. And what that means is to God we came from, and to him we shall return. And it's one of those things that doesn't really, you keep saying it over and over again. Again, you almost feel desensitized, but then you realize about this almost not a circle of life, but how life and death is merely just a chapter in someone's journey. And I was thinking about, even like in pop culture, I'm a big hip hop fan, and Bone Thugs and Harmony had the song "The Crossroads." And if you listen to this song, here is this person, and these people are grieving, and it's about these people going on their next journey. And they're saying, "I'll see you at the crossroads. I will see you when I have the opportunity to meet you at that next chapter." And so, yes, absolutely. Whether it's through entertainment and even through faith, yeah, I grew up my entire life hearing these things, but it isn't until, in my experience, it wasn't until I was dealing with these moments where all of these playbook things, whether spiritually or even pop culturally speaking, where I was realizing, oh yeah, that's what they meant when I heard this, or that's what it meant when they said that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just highlighting that, it's so rare that to be in community and be talking about contemporary spiritual practice that's rooted in ancestral tradition. I don't think I've ever had that conversation. So I'm really grateful to be having this, this community here. So I want to pass it on to Sarita and Joan. I'm curious to hear, what is your spiritual practice like? Is that something, you are looking back to your own ancestral rituals and traditions, or is that something you've collected over the years? I'm just curious, like, how do you embody, your South Asian spirituality?
Yeah, I can go first. I teach, I'm a healer, educator in the yogic and Ayurvedic tradition. And I use the word tradition to really mean like as close as it can embody really this concept which Aman brought in so beautifully of, we shall return. And really that life lives and feeds off of death. So whatever you ate today, that was life that surrendered itself for you to have the sustenance and fuel to live. And we're constantly in this cycle of life and death. And what the tantrics, which is really kind of where my practice starts to get a little bit deeper, sought is that death is sacred. And that has really changed my life profoundly. And so when I get into practice, the physical practice is everything from like nidra, which in the West, a lot of people misconceive as yogic sleep, but it's actually about becoming awake to this life that is, quote unquote, abundant, that is sacred. But, how can we get there when we're constantly feeling a sense of loss? And I think about loss as the death of ourselves amidst change. And so I think of it as this last year, a lot of people really had to witness their privilege, the isms that are inherent within all of us. At the murder of George Floyd here in Minneapolis, I had to really kind of come to terms with in what ways have they been part of spaces that have privileged or have made space for violence. And then how to uproot, to undo, to eradicate that which is not us, that has been socialized through, education, institutions, systemic oppression as that works, to return to self. It is a practice of remembrance. And that change that a lot of people have endured or really endured in the last year with the uprising and the pandemic, it does create a sense of death of identity. I notice in community, some people have a little bit more challenge with the change of community, the activism and going to the streets, but also being like, we have to change the way we talk to each other. We have to change the way that we feel about activism, that it isn't just a hashtag and something that I put on Instagram, but I'm actually doing mutual aid work now, or I'm doing some type of organizing for Black liberation. So, and I say that because I think that in the West, spirituality has been co-opted so deeply. My, tradition, our South Asian traditions in particular with yoga and Ayurveda now, that you see this sort of these concepts thrown around about death, and it's like, oh, well, these people died so that we could be better. And that was even used, maybe not so much spiritually, but politically by the mayor here. Mayor Fry used George Floyd's, the taking of his life as sort of this martyr concept, like, so he died so that we could become awake. And that's not true. In fact, he's very much asleep to reality if that's the case. George Floyd fought for his life to the end. And so I really like to utilize my practice to become in this essence of awakeness, and also share that with my community, specifically Black and Brown folks, because the people who often fight the hardest, who do the mutual aid, who are worn and torn, are Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. And we are also the ones that have the least amount of space to rest, to digest, and to heal. And so Nidra is a great practice of death. It is a practice of nothingness, of absence. Ni means nothing. Drew of Nidra means to draw forth. And it's not to say I'm drawing forth a complete absence of life. It's saying I'm allowing my mind to come into a state of nothingness, to become more conscious of what is most important to me. And, you know, the side effect of that is like, you do feel rested, you do feel better. But deeper side effects or deeper impact of these practices, spiritual practices in India, are actually like becoming more imbalanced with life, enjoying life, being able to be present with life. That's so important. So I really look at my practice as both something that holds together the work I do in community, and also a teaching and a framework that folks can use to come back.
So Roshni, I'm going to ask you to repeat that question for me one more time, because it's such a loaded question for me. I feel like I still need a minute to sink into it.
I think Joan maybe frozen. Are you there, Joan? I think you were frozen for a bit.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you see and hear me?
Yeah. I'm forgetting the question too now after Sarita sharing so beautifully about death and awakening. Wow, I'm totally lost, Zubin, to remember what the question was.
Yeah, it was sort of like, how do we define or like come into being with our ancestral practices?
Right, yeah. How do you embody, your South Asianness and your spirituality?
Yes. Okay. So let's get into it. This is a very loaded question for me. As I mentioned before, I sit at the table as a Indo-Caribbean, Indo-Guyanese, Guyanese, South Asian, Indian. And for a very long time, I have felt disconnected from my Indianness. And I have felt very disconnected calling myself an Indian, calling myself a South Asian. Part of that disconnection has been because as a Indo-Caribbean, I've heard so many times in my life, you're not a real Indian, because my ancestors were displaced from mainland India, brought to the Caribbean as indentured servants for about 5 generations. So for me, I really, in the beginning, I looked away from my South Asianness. I looked away from my Indianness because there was no space for me in it. And coming into my spirituality really didn't involve my South Asianness or my Indianness until well into my late 20s, early 30s. So coming into my spirituality actually for me began with real life experience, y'all. And for me, it was going through the process of so much harm and violence that I endured as a child, sexual violence as a child, and that continued into my late teenage years, really having a big impact on my mental health, really going through depression, ideating suicide, becoming a teen parent, and then a single parent by the time I was 20, all of that by the time I was 20. And that really triggered a deep, deep, deep depression, despair, sorrow, agony within me that made me question, what is life about? Who am I? Why am I here? There has to be more to life than this. And it was really this pivotal moment in my early 20s where I was in a deep depression. I was 23, my child was 3, and almost on a daily basis, I'm ideating suicide. And it was really loving her and loving her life so much that made me choose my life and made me choose to live and made me choose life every day onwards. And it was that moment that I decided to get into a relationship with healing and be in relationship with healing. I had no idea what that was going to look like. I had no idea it would take me to where I am now, reclaiming my Hindu ancestry, because I had turned away from that. I turned away from all of that. But my journey, my spiritual journey, led me back to it eventually to reclaim my ancestors, because I had displaced my ancestors within myself as well, right? There was no connection within me with my Indianness, with my Indian ancestry, with my South Asianness. So I had disconnected myself from that for many years. And my spiritual life really just evolved out of wanting to heal and wanting to live and wanting to be in connection with something bigger than what I was seeing around me. And knowing that there has to be something more than what I am seeing, the veil, the illusion, there has to be something more. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew that there was. And so now what I do is I have reclaimed my ancestors. I have reclaimed my Hindu lineage. I have reclaimed all of that. And I do draw from that as inspiration to experience my divinity. However, that's not the end all for me. That's not the, written in stone for me. I have a lot of problems, beef with mainland Hinduism. And so I'm very critical of it. For me, it's having a divine connection that centers my spiritual connection, that centers how I see myself and my connection to the world, to others, to nature, to my children, how I treat everyone. The divine is me. I am the divine, right? I look to myself to be in connection with the divine, to embody my life, embody my growth, embody my expansion, to become consciously aware. And I'll draw from my ancestry to as inspiration, but it's not a thing that I don't know what the word is to use for it, but I'm not vehement about following any particular practice or any particular
religion.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Right now I'm fasting for Ramadan. So I'm drawing from everything to embody my spirituality and what calls to me to be in deeper connection.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I think your story is really highlighting how it is really complicated to be South Asian. And a lot of people think it means being Indian, and that's not the full story. And being South Asian is really, there is a lot of separation. The violence between India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and like you said, Indo-Caribbeans and people across the diaspora. So there is a lot of, I would say, violence and oppression within South Asians. For me, that's been a huge source of ancestral grief. So I want to start with Aman. Aman, if you can just share, what does ancestral grief mean to you? And maybe even as a follow-up, if it's related to death, what can we do as South Asians? Like, what would you do, to prepare for death? Be it practical, cultural, spiritual, emotional, any kind of rituals or practices. Yeah, anything you could share with us.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think for me, before I embarked on this journey, I was very much of a child of immigrant, 4.0 student, capitalist driven goals. I have to be the head of this, the successor of this, achieve this and that. And that was like almost like my purpose in life, was just to like get to this level and then get to that level, get to that level. It's just, again, that whole child of immigrant guilt, mom and dad sacrifice so that I could do this. So I have to like be the best at everything. Right. And I think with this film, one of the things that always uh, intrigued me in Islam was the death and the ritual process. And so, as a quick 101, in Islam, when someone dies, very similar to other faiths, like in the Jewish tradition, a body is then brought in by the community, and there's a ceremonial washing of the body, and then the body is wrapped in a white cloth, and then that body is placed in the ground. And during that process, and learning more and more about it, we probably filmed at least 60, 70, even 100 of these. I realized very quickly early on that no matter who you are, whether you are a CEO of a tech company, whether you are a wealthy person from a lower income bracket, whatever your life circumstances are, we all are washed and prepared the same way. We all are buried in the ground the exact same way. We come into this earth the same way, and we're going to leave this earth in the same way. And that was something that, yes, it sounds like common sense, but it was just really jarring to, in a good way, to really experience that it was truly the liberator, the equalizer for all of us, that we all are going to leave and come into this earth in the same way. And so for me, all of those silly, superficial things really just don't matter. And what was beautiful was seeing the community to come together to take care of these people as they were preparing for their next chapter in their journey. And so in our film, you'll see Hanif, the casket maker in the film, where he talks about how before he washes every body, he gives that person a hug and he gives them like a kiss on the forehead just to let them know how much he cares about them. And it's also a way to comfort families and letting them know how much love they're taking care of their loved one. And Hanif is just an incredible person. Like literally every day, I can even show you my phone. Every day he will text me. Let me see, I have some messages. But yeah, he messages me every day telling me how much he loves me. Every single day. I've known this man for like 4 or 5 years now. Every day I wake up to messages telling him telling me how much he loves me. And so it has helped with these traditions, whether South Asian ancestors or, regardless of where we come from, we all have these moments of caring that I think are important to make habits in our lives. And it's really helped me shift how I look at my own life, not just about how do I want to be remembered, but I really pride myself on the relationships that I build with people and being a lot more purposeful with the relationships that I have with people. And so all of this was in front of me, whether is it in my faith or other people's cultures. And Joan, I love how you've approached things. I often call it spiritual biryani, where you take all these like great ingredients from all these different cultures and faiths, and you kind of just, mix it together. And the result is this beautiful dish. And that's something that I love to do as well. And yes, we have within the South Asian community, regardless of our faith backgrounds, we have these incredible traditions. And I think it's important to step outside of our own comfort zones and learn about all these beautiful things, because there's so many faith systems and cultures and countries and places all over the world that we shouldn't just look at these things just from our own upbringings and our own experiences, that we should be open and really embrace the beauty all around the world and for all that it is. And I can speak from personal experience in trying to do that and the joy in that. And so, yeah, it's something that I can't, talk about enough.
Yeah, so
I was going to ask about Hanif, your experiences with Hanif. He was and I hope everyone can see this film when it comes out. There's just so much love exuding from this person. Where do you think that's coming from? Do you think that's because he is encountering death every single day in a very, very close way? I mean, he's the last person to touch many of these bodies. Or I know he's had some hardships in the past. I believe he was incarcerated at one point. Where do you think that love is stemming from?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think initially we went into this film thinking, oh, this is a story about a guy that's trying to mentor two kids, and that is the story, right? And you realize very early on in the film, and then even just spending time with Hanif, that what drives him are many things. Yeah, he was a person like any human being, has had its ups and downs. And we all have our unique experiences with ups and downs, but for him, what drives him is this love for people. And I thought this was a story where this guy was helping kids, but he needs these kids as much as they need him. It's this mutual beneficial relationship. These kids have given him purpose and have given him meaning, and caring for people have given him purpose as well. And again, it's about those relationships. And that is what drives him to do what he does. And we hope with this film and hearing Hanif's story that people can think about their own lives and think about the relationships they build and how they can continue to cultivate those and strengthen those. But yeah, it's absolutely beautiful to watch. And as somebody in the chat, Holly mentioned earlier in the chat that she loves seeing men of color talking about their feelings. And that exactly, I'm the same way. And these are things that we want to normalize. We want to normalize grown, comfortable men, regardless of our backgrounds and our spectrums, that we can tell each other that we love each other. And that's not deemed as weird or whatever, or these silly, superficial, toxic things, that we can tell people how much we care about them. Not just because of death and life is short and this and that, but to really just maximize life and maximize the joy we have in life, the way our lives are meant to be lived.
Mm-hmm. It comes back to pleasure, right? It's what Jones talked about.
Absolutely.
Like we should be doing things that bring us closer to pleasure. And I think I felt, growing up Indian American, this idea of pleasure is like kind of frowned upon, even self-care or getting a massage or taking a nap, it means anytime you're napping, you're not working or doing hard work. But it's, kind of to me, as I become more like found my own spiritual practice, I'm like, kind of the guiding force is this force towards pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, Sarita and Joan, I wanted to invite you both to share. Sarita, I know when we've talked, you talked a lot about your music and dance and, Kerala, the land being part of, the ancestral grief story. I would love to hear kind of how you combine all of those.
Yeah, so I studied Kathakali in Kerala for the intent of, actually just being back in Kerala. One of my, life's intersections is that I was raised by a single mother who was working class. She was an educator by day and worked at a grocery store by night. And to go back to India wasn't even a consideration for me until when I turned 21. I had to really figure out how to get back to my homeland. So for 20 some years, I didn't have a relationship, and there was a lot of grief in that. A lot of grief in sort of not knowing and not having that relationship to the people and to the land. And then when I did go back and study dance, there was this incredible Bharatanatyam dancer, because Kerala is sort of it's the southwest state of India, and it is like the house of classical arts. And so people study Mohiniyattam, Bharatanatyam, a lot of these classical practices in Kerala. And this dancer actually was from the north, and she was there for like maybe a month or so. And this was a tiny little village called Churu, which is in Trishore. And um, where it just gets around really fast. And so she was asking about me, and one of my friends was like, yeah, you know, she's really curious about you because she keeps saying like, you're Malayalam, but you don't look it. Like, you don't look Malayali. Because I have these like American gestures, you know, Americans are like wide and big and we take up space. And I just love that. And I loved that wherever I traveled, throughout Kerala, like people knew, and they knew this sort of cross section that I was not born, or rather that I didn't grow up there, but that I was Malayali. This deep, beautiful recognition. I mean, it would literally be like I'd go into a shop to get a sari or something, sari clothing, and somebody would just say something, and eventually I started to pick up on the language. Mostly to get around, even though, you know, English is spoken throughout most of Kerala. You know, there was a lot of ancestral grief in that. Like, I would love to be fluent in Malayalam, and it is considered a dead language in the West. I think the last university that was teaching it was University of Pennsylvania, which is obviously fraught with its own problems. And so, you know, you can study Hindi pretty easily here, but these other languages in the South are kind of considered, you know, part of the Dravidian languages. They're dead languages. And so I really found dance as a practice of reclaiming what I had lost, especially because Kathakali is for men specifically, it's not for women. And to really study this beautiful art form that's based on the epic texts, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which are like, if you took the Odyssey and times it by 7, you know, they're huge. And they involve emotions. So rasa sadhana, the study of emotion, they involve the face. So it's like everything from your entire face is painted to reflect an emotion. Your eyes, like, I would literally study for an hour each day, eye movement with my ashan. And I studied 6 hours a day. I studied without mirrors. I studied and lived in a place without mirrors, without connection to the West. And it completely changed my sense of self. And I think this deeper connection to emotion and being able to play it out in mudras and stuff was fantastic. And live music, all of these things that you don't see in dance culture here in the West. So I'd say for the ancestral grief and practice of reclaiming and remembering, dance has been a huge part of that.
Yeah, I connect a lot with your story, especially around dance. Before I get to that piece, so I want to share a little bit about what ancestral grief is for me. And for me, there's a lot of pain to know that I don't know where my ancestors come from. And there's a lot of pain for me to know that I may never know where my ancestors come from. In Guyana, the preservation of my ancestors docking the ship, that's not really honored or kept or preserved. I've had to do a lot of digging and a lot of researching to try and find my ancestors, and still to this day, I'm still looking for them. Asking my parents to tell me oral stories they have heard sometimes leads me in a direction where I feel a little closer to them, but they too don't know. I remember asking my mother once, what is the name of the ship that our ancestors came from? And she said to me, it's called Jahaji, right? But that's a word for ship. That's not the name. of the ship. And so speaking to different elders in my family, asking them to tell me stories from what they heard orally passed down to them is sporadic. It's sporadic. Some folks will tell me something and some folks will tell me something else. It's like a big convoluted swirl of just not knowing. So there's, yes, Shahaji is Hindi name for ship, exactly. So there's a lot of pain for me to know that I can't call my ancestor's name. I can call my Aji, I can call my Nani. That's the closest I can get to. There's a lot of pain in that for me. And so I don't speak my ancestor's mother tongue. I don't even know what that is, right? I use dance though, because dance has been such an intricate part in my life. I didn't really realize just how deeply connected I am to dance. I just thought I love the form, the art of dance. I just appreciate the art of dance. But then I realized that there's a deeper connection to my ancestors with dance. And even though I may not be able to call their name and know where they come from, or their village, or their mother tongue, or their ancestors, I'm connected through dance. And so when I move my body, I feel my ancestral consciousness being activated. When I am dancing, I feel them in me, dancing up my spine with me. And so this is how I feel them. This is how I connect with them. This is how I call them to be with me, is within my body, is through dance. I feel them in this way. So, you know, I live with the pain. I live with the grief. I know I may not ever know. I've made peace with that, but it hurts to make peace with that. And I live with that pain. But I use dance to help me transcend it a little bit, and it does its job. It helps. And the other piece that also helps me is being connected to the goddess and connecting to the goddesses, and calling in the goddesses to be with me and to dance and worship the goddess, right? This actually connects me to my ancestors again. And this actually helps me alleviate some of that pain when I just want my ancestors to hold me. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I really see your longing. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to share the concept of ancestral grief. For me, honestly, it took me almost my entire life to really understand it. And the moment I understand it started when I was a kid. So again, many of us probably have very similar experiences where my dad was very like tough on me when it came to like report cards. He'd, you know, if I got a report card, if I got an 89, he's like, why wasn't this an A? Why'd you get a B? And then I get straight A's and he's like, why are you taking so many easy classes? Like, why are you just breezing through school? Like, really? And so I would always get frustrated. And I remember one day just getting so mad at him, just saying like, nothing I ever do is ever good enough. It's never enough for you. Like, why do you keep doing this? And he told me this story that he grew up in India and he studied to be a civil engineer. He was designing bridges and, you know, all these other things for cities. And when he came to America in the 70s, like many immigrants, their degrees didn't really mean as much. And so one of his first jobs was mopping floors at Dunkin' Donuts, and, you know, worked at a business making donuts for the rest of his life. And he told me that every time he would drive on a bridge, he would get sad because he would always say to himself, that could have been me. That could have been me. And he's like, the reason why I push you so hard is I don't want you to ever feel like that could have been you. And so in a couple years ago, I was doing a show in Germany. And at the time there was this big, this was in Berlin. And at the time there was this big Islamophobic group that was doing this like anti-Islam rally. And so the State Department had reached out to me saying, hey, I don't know if you should do this event. There's these like hate groups that are going to be out there. And I'm like, yo, these organizers sold out this show. They promoted it. Why should we punish them for what some ignorant people are doing outside? Like, let them do that. Let's invite them to the show. Like, who cares? And we do the event, and there was a bunch of like hate groups that were doing this, and they were claiming that 100,000 people are going to come out to speak out against Muslims. 100,000 people, 100,000 people, 100,000 people. The amount of people that actually showed up was 105. But there were more than 30,000 Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, atheists, Jewish people that came out to form an interfaith coalition of love to speak out against them. And again, it just shows you how much credence we give to ignorant fools. And so we invited some of them to come to the show. And after the show, one of the guys came up to me. He was actually a skinhead. His name was David. And I was telling this story about my dad on stage, about my dad pushing me, always about report cards growing up. And so David came up to me after the show and said that, I'll be honest with you. I've never met a Muslim in my life. And, I was afraid of you guys. I saw what was on TV and this and that, and I got super scared. And hearing your story, makes me feel ashamed to have ever been afraid. And he told me about how his father came from Poland and his dad pushed him in a very similar way. And I'll never forget what he said. He said that hearing the story about your dad makes me want to go home and give my dad a hug. And I said, the fact that you just told me that makes me want to go home and give my dad a hug. And I called my dad that night and I said, Dad, this is the most beautiful bridge you have ever designed. And these are the things that you should be proud of. And yes, when we grieve, we often think about all the sacrifices our parents made to live the life that we can live now. But I like to go deeper than that, beyond just my parents. I think about the generations before them and the generations and generations before them. All the things that the people did to give us the opportunity to live the life that we have now, whether it's the civil rights activists, whether it's the artists, whether it's the spiritual healers and just the mothers and the children and all the people that have given their lives so that we can live a better life for ourselves, is something that not only do I practice daily gratitude for, but it also makes me think about what are the things that I'm doing, not only just for my family and future families and generations and my own, family tree, but even just society. What are we doing to make a better life for the people that come after us? And so it was the first time that I really thought about spiritual grieving or ancestral grieving in that context of all the things that people have done throughout life and throughout history so that we can live the life that we have now. And how can we take that baton and, continue down that same path for future generations?
Wow. Thank you, Aman. We're going to open up to questions in a minute here. So if you want to raise your hand in the chat or put questions in the chat itself, we can call on you. I wanted to ask Sarita about your experience in the yoga and meditation communities, which are in this country are so dominated by Caucasian voices. I find so much healing from yoga, but I'm usually the only brown person there, even in a place like San Francisco, where I was living for a long time. I live in a town now it's very white, but there's a kirtan happening next week that I'm going to go to, but I'm very anxious about it because I'm also quite confident I'm likely going to be the only South Asian there. So yeah, I'm just curious about how you kind of see that intersection between, Eastern spirituality and yoga meditation in the US, how you feel in those communities. I know you're doing retreats specifically for people of color. I read on your website, there's some really interesting reasons behind that. So curious on your perspective.
Yeah, so I started like one of the first yoga practices for people of color in Minneapolis for Indigenous, Black, and POC folks. I don't know, like 7 years ago. And it came about from healing justice work that I was doing, literally like on the front lines, where, to be specific, Philando Castile had been murdered by the police in St. Paul. And we were doing, this colleague of mine and I were doing this like healing tent outside the governor's mansion. And we had specifically this space available to folks of color. And the people who were coming in the tent were elders. And all of a sudden, I was like cradling a grandmother's head. And she was, you know, lying down in the tent, and I was just holding her head. And she was just closing her eyes and resting. And it was like a pretty intense experience, but I've been doing healing work since I was 19, of just holding space for people. So it was also something I felt relatively like I was okay to do. And there was consent there. And that invitation in my life to explore like really pushing the boundaries around the wellness industry that is so whitewashed and so heavily about co-opting, stealing our practices, Indigenous practices, Black practices, South Asian practices, and saying, you know what, no. And it was immediate. It was like I went and did my own retreat up in the Boundary Waters. I jumped into the freezing cold water in February. This was like a sauna practice. And just as someone who was born in Kerala, it's like I do think it's in my DNA to like be in 80-degree jungle weather. I'm not going to just jump into northern Minnesota lake in February. And for folks who don't know, it gets to be like negative 30 degrees in Minnesota. And it was just this like, I came back from that retreat in time of meditation around Dharma, of what it is that I want, desire. Like I wanted space for us to practice. And I really wanted to take the teachings that I was receiving in all white rooms, you know, and I had to deal with that, being around white people who would say really horrible things about Indians, or like there would be a lot of people who like to like do the little Indian voice or whatever that is, that, you know, sort of gesturing. And so it's like being in a space of spiritual practice when you're also amidst racism, you really have to get like Ganesha's sword in your hand, which is the you know, right? He has this like slash of discernment, and you really have to have the heads of Kali around the neck, the bleeding heads, and the gushing blood coming out of her mouth, the act of dissolution. Like I will no longer live in the state of what you think is right and okay, knowing that it isn't the truth. And so to activate that truth, I, you know, immediately contacted somebody, Ephraim from Modus Locus here in Minneapolis, and never met before. Immediately, it was like one by one, things started to line up. And what Dharma in my tradition, the tantrics talk about, like the minute that you come into what it is that you want in your life deeply, there's going to be some fire, some friction, because the deeper we are in the illumination of who we are meant to be and our calling, the more the universe is like, so how deep do you really want this? And I had an experience where I did a Women of Color Sangha practice. The Star Tribune had written about it, and this person called and left this voicemail saying that she was going to come to this practice because it was unfair that as a white woman she couldn't be a part of it, and she was going to disrupt it, and da-da-da-da-da. And the studio didn't really do anything for me. They didn't protect me. So I really had to get deep into my own practice and be like, okay, boundary and protection work in my own practice, so that when I get there to hold space for people, I'm not thinking, is she going to open the door right now? Is she going to hurt any, you know, it was kind of crazy. And I went, you know, as steadfast as I was, like white supremacy is exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. Everyone on this call knows that. And we need space. So it's not just about space in the city to rest, digest, and heal, but to actually leave and to be on different land in relationship to the people of that land and study self-mastery, study Ayurveda, study these principles of how to be in the world in your highest calling, and not have it centering whiteness, not have it, like, I think often too, BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous, POC, like, we can get caught in these webs of like, our liberation is centering whiteness again, and these stories of oppression. And it's like, yeah, those exist, but that's not who we are. And so the rest and liberation practice became a way of like getting people out of this country, and giving them a space to rest. And what I found is that, like, you know, everybody had difficulty with this. They had difficulty with saying like, okay, I deserve this. And that took like a couple of days to get into the, oh yeah, I do deserve this. And then when I found it's like everyone talking about different stories of like, this is the first time I felt joy in a long time. And then there were also stories about the relationship to the land, swimming in the ocean in the Middle Passage. The stories were just like incredible. And I've been now working on continuing, once COVID is over, these practices of retreat and being able to get away. When I went to this beautiful retreat center, they said it was the first time they'd ever seen so many people of color before. They were really honestly shocked. And that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that the only people who get to take care of themselves and go on vacation and embody these yogic practices are white. That's absolutely absurd. And I think what white folks need to do is start to ask themselves why they don't believe Black and Brown and Indigenous people deserve this too. Because I'm fighting for us to be in practice in spaces in Minneapolis, but we also deserve luxury. We also deserve decadence. We deserve, in these practices of joy, also nice things. And it's not necessarily like we deserve riches and wealth and capitalism, but we deserve to be treated well. And so yeah, it's been like, you know, when we get into our dharma of what it is that we want, our calling in life, the practice of that and that fortitude, that fire, Kali's like energy, the universe starts to see, it opens to that calling as a mirror and a reflection, and things start to continue to drop into place. So yeah.
Thank you all just for the beautiful ways you shared of, you know, we talk about resilience, but again, that has such a hardness to it. But I think the way you shared your vulnerability, the stories of rest, the stories of pleasure, um, to me, that is our ancestral way of being. That is our resilience. That is our immunity. So thank you so much for your stories and wisdom. And I want to open it up to the audience. Please, if you have any questions to our panelists, or just if you want to, you know, open it up to anyone, you can raise your hand. I think that's a hand emoji, or tap it in the chat box and we'll present it to the panel.
Joan, I actually have a question for you, if you don't mind, and you tell me if it's a sensitive subject. But you talked about, you know, your experiences and wanting to feel connected to your ancestors, but there's been all these external forces that have pulled you away from those. Have there been moments, like how do you balance that out, like with trying to find joy and comfort, but at the same time, there's so much pain that goes with that as well? Like I'm sure, I know it's a loaded question, but can you talk a little bit about what that experience and what that journey is like?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you for asking me. You know, lately I've been doing a lot of reflecting. You know, Ramadan is the queen of months here, so I've been I've been my consciousness, my perspectives has been expanding as I've been observing Ramadan. And one of the things that's been illuminating for me this couple of weeks is being in relationship with trauma. And being in a relationship with trauma for me means that I can't bypass that trauma touches me. I can't bypass that there's pain in not knowing my ancestors or where they come from or my mother tongue. I can't bypass that there is that trauma of displacement from colonization, indentureship, imperialism. I can't bypass that. And that I live with that every day. So what has been illuminating is that, okay, I have to accept that I have a relationship with trauma. When I see a trans youth murder, that touches me. I have a relationship with trauma. When I see another Black man, woman, teenager killed, that touches me. I have a relationship with trauma. Whether I like it or not, whether it's fair or not, whether I'm enraged that I have to go through this or not, that relationship is there. And so what I've been asking myself lately is, how can I be in harmony with trauma? How can I have a harmonious relationship with trauma? It's not going anywhere. All right. How can I be in harmony with this? And for me, it's about pleasure again. It comes back down to pleasure. And it comes back down to really wanting to know my radiance, really wanting to know my joy, really wanting to know my beauty, really wanting to know my wholeness. And all of on my glory, my luminosity, wanting to know my vigor, all of this. And so I don't like to use the word balance. I like to use the word harmony. So I don't try to eradicate, get rid of, fix, develop. I don't try to do any of that sort of stuff with my pain, but instead I'm present with it. I develop intimacy with it. I want to know it, feel it, see it, taste it, breathe it, right? I want to hold it. I want to be tender with it. I have to be in relationship with it. So I'm not going to push it away. I'm not going to separate myself from it. I'm going to call it in, and I'm going to love myself with it. And that's how I've been finding harmony with the pain that I have to live with. And it just comes in bouts and it goes, but I have, these pleasure practices, dance, fruit, eating, nature that keeps me in harmony with the goodness, with my wholeness. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. No, just fascinating. Thank you for sharing. Absolutely. I can only imagine what that journey is like. And so I appreciate you sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to put up a poll because we're at time. I want to make sure that people are able to answer some of these questions. And Polly, you could share the next slides. But I just wanted to thank everyone. Roshni, Sarita, Aman, Joan, thank you so much for sharing your stories. I mean, I want to do more of this. We're actually going to do a tea-chat next week, but I don't want this to be the only time we talk about these topics or reimagine. I think a lot of, it could be a one-off thing, but this is so important to me. And so I really want to support all of you in your work and whatever Reimagine can do. That would be, just let me know, reach out anytime. And so honored that you spent your time with us today. Want to announce some events. We're doing a tea chat next Friday. So as you can see, we just scratched the surface here. We could probably keep talking for another hour and a half, which is why we have another hour and a half scheduled next Friday. Totally optional. Anyone can join. It's just a place for us it's unstructured. There's no agenda. Just come, talk, share, listen, grab a warm drink and masala chai, and we'll just be together. So that's coming up next Friday. You can register on letsreimagine.org. And we have 6 more table talks scheduled. If you go to the next slide, please. Coming up next week, we're doing the grief of Black women and mothers with Oceana Sawyer, who was at this event, but she had to leave a bit early. We just did an event called the Grief of Black Men last night that I was on, and it was really, really really powerful. So I encourage you to come to that if you can. And then we'll have Between Worlds, which will talk about what it's like to be a mixed race person in this country. And that's organized by Holly and Elizabeth, and they put together this panel here. And then Andy's got 3 table talks. He's organizing one's for same gender loving LGBTQ folks aging together, coming up end of May. And then in Pride Month, we have a few more Pride events, De Ambientes for the Puerto Rican community. And then I'm really excited about this event on Ballroom in early June. So thank you all for being here. Next slide, please. So Reimagine is a platform. We're a 501c3. We're a community organization. Anybody can host an event similar to this. You can you can come to Table Talk. You can just share it. But we'd love to like have people talk about their experiences and host events, and I can support you with that. So please email me with any questions, comments, suggestions, and yeah, thank you all. We're a few minutes long, but we call this Indian Standard Time, IST. So for only 5 minutes over, it's actually really good, actually. So thank you, and appreciate you. Everyone can unmute if they want and say anything they'd like, and we'll stay on for a couple minutes, and then hope to see you soon.
I think next time we'll have to share our ancestral recipes. I definitely want that biryani recipe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a perfect Reimagine event, spiritual biryani.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely want to shout out all the people reflecting in the comments. Bharati, Desai, thank you for sharing your story, especially. But yeah, everybody else, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your reflections as well in the comments.
Excellent. All right, thank you, everybody. Bye.
Peace.
Peace.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here.